Okay.
100% real, 100% of the time. Real Talk 101 Radio.
Hey guys, Shannon Fox here. Thanks for tuning in. Today you're watching Real Talk 101 Radio with MJS Productions. Today I'm coming at you with this on-location exclusive interview with Karen Severson. You guys may remember the name from maybe many years ago. She was convicted of second-degree murder for her best friend. So today we're sitting down with her, getting a little bit more personal about what happened, but also about her movement forward with the anti-bullying movement and her progression today. Hi, Karen.
Hi.
Thanks for sitting down with us today. So just kind of talking to you, getting to know you a little bit more. I know you really want to push the anti-bullying movement.
Absolutely.
So do you kind of want to start by telling us a little bit about that, what it is, and how that came about?
Well, it came about because I've been watching on the news, I've been watching on the internet, reading in the newspapers how many teenagers in schools are just hurting each other, killing each other, doing things, being bullies. And what happened is when I got out of prison, I realized something has to change very drastically in this world. Mm-hmm. And I think what we are lacking as a society is the education and the experience of what bullying really is. And I have both. I have the education to offer to parents, to school teachers, and to other teenagers, but I have the experience that 99% doesn't have. And I don't want to sit home and think, oh, look at me, I did this and I was involved in that, and let me just move on with my life. I think that my life needs to move on by helping others.
Making a difference.
Absolutely.
And I think young people, that's the time where they're so easily influenced. So I think to hear it from someone that has lived it will maybe help them to take it a little bit more serious.
Right.
Rather than just, being preached to, don't bully, or bullying's bad. Right. You have someone right here in front of you that's lived that life, so I think that that's going to make an impact.
Right, that's what I'm hoping.
Mm-hmm. So take us back just briefly to that day. You were 17, right?
Right.
17, just kind of briefly give an overview of that day and what happened.
Well, to make it quickly, there was 3 of us that had a personal resentment towards the victim, and we decided to confront her collectively on what she's been doing. The typical teenage stuff, jealousies, insecurities, fears, maybe she's stealing my boyfriend, maybe not. And we wanted to confront her, and we did. And unfortunately, during the confrontation, things went south. They went into a direction that we never talked about, never discussed. And one thing I want to make very clear is that bullying the people have pack animal mentality. In other words, if I had confronted the girl by myself, we would have just had a conversation basically. Mm-hmm. If the other girl would have confronted her alone, same thing, there would have been a conversation. But when one person fuels the next person's fire and says, let's do this, as like I said, bullying is like pack animal mentality. When one starts, the rest jump in.
Like tag team kind of thing?
Absolutely. Like wolves. If you think of wolves, you see a lone wolf. They don't pounce on animals. But when the pack shows up, collectively, they all pounce. Mm-hmm. And that's what happened to us. We went to our friend to confront, and one thing led to another, and it was snowballed. And things got really out of hand, and she ended up being killed. I did participate in the murder. I did not actually kill her myself, but I was a participant. If I wouldn't have been, if I would have stepped up, I believe that I could have saved her. Mm-hmm. I had been her bodyguard, so to speak. I was labeled that at 12 years old, and I fought her fights for her for years. Mm-hmm. And this time I didn't, and that's just a really unfortunate thing. I made a life-changing decision for all of us involved when I turned my back and said I don't want to help.
Yeah. So looking back and just kind of replaying that day, I'm sure, of course, then you probably feel like there's a ton of different things you could have did. Is there anything that sticks out in your mind that, like, the most that you feel, okay, I could have did this instead of it going this way?
Well, you know what, there were so many forks in the road. Like, for example, just driving up there. That wasn't where we were supposed to meet. We weren't going to go to the mountains. Though we did party up there a lot, that's not where we were supposed to go. We were supposed to meet at a park. So when the other girl motioned me to follow her and we kept going, fork number 1, turn around. Why didn't I? Because it's my friends and I'm I'm here with you and I'm going to follow. Obligation, peer pressure, you just follow. That's where I should have turned around. Getting up there with the name calling, I didn't have to call her names. I was her friend for years. But I did. When one called a name and another one did, of course I'm going to join in. And fork number 2, why did I get involved in that? Why did I go that far, in any of this? And as we walked down the trail, I didn't want to go down the trail. I don't think any of us really wanted to go down the trail, but collectively we did. What if I would have been the bigger person and said, no, I don't want to do this? But I didn't, And when one girl brought out a knife and a bandana, she tied up her hands and started to cut her hair because that was her like beauty, was her long hair.
Okay.
And it was kind of like dethrone the queen of her beauty, cut her hair.
What she had.
Right, and then it was kind of funny because it was, haha, you got to go get a haircut now. And, there was no plan to kill her. We were humiliating her. And it just, like I said, we never discussed that. That was kind of weird, but we went into it and I was part of that. Fork number whatever, I should have turned around. I shouldn't have grabbed the knife and said, okay, I'll do it. Right. When I was leaving, I should have left. I turned around and the girl that actually held her underwater and her were arguing and they were cussing at each other. And the victim looked at me because I had protected her for years. Like, why aren't you doing anything? And I chose not to. In fact, I chose to walk up and push her and say, just go to her. I was so just done with this whole, this protecting and helping. And in my own personal resentments, I pushed her. Later to find out, I pushed her to her death because that girl ultimately ended up killing her.
Right, so you were just in a different mindset that day.
Right, and there's so many other things after that. I mean, there were so many forks in the road, and I chose the wrong one every time. Every time.
So going forward, you served your time. You did your time
23 and a half years, almost 24 years.
Almost 24 years you served your time. And at what point when you were serving your time did you get like that aha moment where you're like, you know what, this is what I want to focus on, making a difference when I get out and hold the anti-bullying movement?
Right. Well, what happened was I went to a parole board hearing, and I listened to them tell me how bad I was, and I listened to the DA, and I listened to the victim's family, and I sat there and I thought, my God, I mean, what a horrible person I am. And I walked out, and I was denied parole, for a couple years, and I come walking out, and I looked around at the prison yard, and I thought, well, this is it. And the more I kept walking, I thought, you know what, something has to change. Something has to change. Whoever they're talking about in there, I don't like that girl. I don't want to be that girl. And my circumstances aren't going to change. Other people are not going to change. So the thing that has to change is going to be me. And I decided and went on a quest, personal quest, to do everything I could to change myself. I became more involved in self-help groups with the women in the prison and helping them. And finding out about myself. Why did I do these things? Why was I involved? How could I allow myself to get there? What was wrong with me? And I went on year after year just putting the flashlight deep inside. And when I started seeing on the news, some young girls killing themselves, or some 2 girls and a boy or something were killing another girl, they're bullies. And I thought, oh my gosh, I was a bully. I was a bully. Right. They called me mean girls because bullying wasn't the thing in 1988. I was a mean girl. And I was. And I thought, man, that has got to change. If these kids can only know or hear, what can happen. Yeah. I mean, look I'm doing X amount of years in prison. Somebody's, deceased because I was involved. My family, there's so many victims. Look at my family. They lost me. My daughter lost her mother for many years. They suffered too. What about the other girls that were involved? They had families. I mean, the list, it just goes on. And the only way to stop this is to actually educate the parents to look for the warning signs, the teachers to look for the warning signs, to educate the youth, you know, that it is okay to say no when you don't want to do something. A lot of people think being a bully is a strength. It shows how tough you are.
Right.
But that is the biggest weakness there is.
Right. There's
because
insecurities with that too.
Yeah. It takes a strong person to turn their back and walk away, you know, and say, no, I'm not going to do it. That's the strength we need out there. Not the people that are going, okay, I'll do it. You know?
So can you maybe talk about like a couple signs of bullying for maybe parents? What are some things that people should look out for?
Well, the first thing they need to look out for is their child's friends and associates. Yes, they're going to have best friends, you know, those that are close. I mean, look at me. I was Missy's best friend. I was the closest. And I ultimately betrayed her. Now, the warning sign is why would I get into a place where I would betray her? Because there was frustrations going on. And people, like my parents, you know, not Missy's parents couldn't look for this, but my parents could have said, why are you always running down there every time they snap their finger for you? Why are you doing that? Because if I have to run, leave my family to go tend to this other family, or my best friend, or, you know, similar, you know, people like that, what's wrong that I feel that that I have to be obligated and committed to these outsiders? Why am I not focused on my family and my schooling and what I'm doing? Why am I so driven to go out here? That's a sign. When your child has to run and go help their friend, run and go help, you know, another family, you know, if you don't have a bad family life, I had a great family life. So it's not like I was trying to get away from my family, you know, but I felt obligated to my friends. That's one big trigger people need to start looking for.
Which is common among teenagers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, look at the loyalty. Where does their loyalty lay? Now, if their loyalty is for a friend, you know, and there are real best friends, you know, where they're going to help their friend. I'm not saying, you know what they are. You know when they have to drop everything to go to this person. Why? And if they can't answer the question, why do you have to go right now? Oh, because she needs me. No, that's not a good answer. Why? If they can't answer that, I wouldn't let them go. I wouldn't let them go. You know, and another thing for teachers and parents both, quit chalking up the youth today as they're just teenagers.
Right.
That is the worst mistake a parent and a teacher can make, is just saying they're just teenagers. You know, okay, yes, we are teenagers, or they are teenagers. But just chalking every little thing they do as just teenagers, that is a huge mistake that we make in society. We need to find out, why are they doing this? Why isn't she able to read? Why isn't she able to excel in math? Why does she skip school? Why is she ditching? Why is she not here? You know, why is her absence record longer than her attendance record?
Right.
You know, is it a family issue, or is this kid sneaking out the gate like I used to do? You know, if my mom knew half the time I snuck out the gate, she'd be mortified. I learned to forge her name so I could make my own note.
Right.
You know, and I'm not the only one doing that, but trust me. You know, there are other kids doing that, but people need to start looking at this.
So it definitely sounds like a lot of involvement, like be involved.
Right.
Parents, teachers, anyone that makes a difference, you
Right.
know, in teenagers' lives, be involved.
Right.
And observing, it sounds like also being sure to observe and really take a look at how they're acting.
Yeah. And to listen.
Listen.
You know, because sometimes your child's crying out for help, but you listen. You know, and they might not just come in and go, help me. You know, they don't really do that. But if their friends are inviting them somewhere and they say, well, I don't really want to go, but they want me to go, whoa, warning sign. They're crying out for help. They don't really want to go, but they feel they have to. Man, pull them in. Pull them in.
Teaching them about peer pressure and
Right.
how to fight peer pressure and how to be
Right.
strong and have their own character.
Right. And be able to say no. You know, that is a 2-letter word that is the strongest word that there is. You just say no. Do you want to go with me here? No. Do you want to use these drugs? No. Do you want to try this? No. It's okay to say no. More kids need to be taught it's okay to say no.
So now you're focusing on the anti-bullying movement that you have, and you're going to be working with the LAPD. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I met a sergeant in the LAPD, and he actually said to me that I have what he lacks. He says, I can do the anti-bullying, I can go to schools, I can talk to my cadets, but I can only tell them legally what to watch out for.
Right.
And this is the repercussions legally. He says, I don't have experience. He says, you do. If we could tag team, join together so they can hear what a real bully does and why. And he says, you have the experience that I don't have. And experience speaks volumes, And so he wants me to work with him, talk to the cadets, I think sometime in March. So that's kind of exciting, especially because I did so many years in prison.
Right.
It's one of those ironies to actually be working with the LAPD now.
Right.
It's like I was on the other side of the law, and now I'm like, here I am to help. And it doesn't matter. To me, it doesn't matter who you are. If I can help you to help others, I'm going to do it. That's my life's goal. Yeah.
Right. And are you going to be planning to work with any other organizations?
Oh, absolutely. I'm working with hoping to get more involved with Nick Lowry's youth foundation, and he has Champions Against Bullying, and that's an awesome thing. You can go punch on and look at that. They do a lot of stuff. He goes to different schools, and and the kids just love him. The videos that I've been watching, they just absolutely love him. I mean, here's a NFL Hall of Famer coming in with his football, and the kids are just like glued to him. And he has the personality that lures people in, which is wonderful. And I want to work with him because I have the other experience again. The hands-on, absolutely, that I think can contribute. And he and I, we email back and forth, and he suggested that let's work on writing a book about bullying to young kids. So I'm in the process right now. I'm supposed to work on 10 chapters, and so I'm actually doing that. And of course, once the first of the year comes, the holidays kind of slowed things down. I expect things to really start taking off in all sorts of organizations.
Right. Well, that'll be good because you can really provide that hands-on wisdom.
Right.
And just like he was saying, that'll really make an impact if they're hearing it from someone that's lived it and that's gone through that.
Right.
So talk a little bit about your acronym CLUE, the Get a Clue, which
that's my motto.
KLUWE.
Right.
So talk a little bit. I know what it means. I think that's pretty cool. Go ahead and say it.
Yeah, that's my motto. It's like be informed, get a clue. And the K is for knowledge, and the L is for learning, and the U is for understanding, and the W is for wisdom, because you've got to know how to answer these kids, and the E is for experience. Get a clue. If you don't have those 5 things, if you don't have knowledge, go get it. Somebody does. If you get the learning, at least you can learn every day. The understanding, once you understand why a teenager is doing something like bullying, once you learn, you'll be able to attack it better.
Right.
Wisdom. You have to know how to answer them. You can't answer them out the side of your neck when they're asking a question and just blow up at them, because that just, they're teenagers. That's going to turn them off. But the experience. And a lot of people don't have the experience, but I do. There's a lot of people like me that do have experiences. Use them. We're out there to say, use us. What you lack, I have. Let me share it.
Right.
That's what it's all about.
Yeah, because that'll help someone else.
Right.
Yeah. And talk a little bit, just briefly, about your book. I know you're pretty much an open book, to your past and what's happened.
Right.
So just kind of briefly talk about that. That's the uncut version. Everything is pretty much out there.
Right, because I did have the first book, and that was more on the spiritual side, and I used a pen name because I didn't want to put myself out there and anger anybody, but they found out it was me, and that angered people anyway. And then I started seeing things on the internet. I started hearing reading different articles, just all sorts of stuff. And I thought, you know what? These people are trying to tell my life story. They're trying to tell who I am, and they don't know me. They really don't know me. They don't even know what happened in my childhood. And they're going to still make up stories for this one incident. You know, the crime is a horrible thing, and I regret that it happened. And I regret more that I was part of it. I will always forever live with that. But the crime was a small part of my life. It wasn't my life. You know, I start from being adopted at birth all the way to today, what I'm doing today, and all the in-betweens. There was a lot that went on in my life. And so I decided nobody could tell my life better than me, and that's why I called the book, My Life, I Lived It, by Karen Severson. You didn't live my life. You didn't even walk 5 minutes in my shoes. And you want to tell stories about me that you don't know nothing about. There's a lot of ignorance. I've learned ignorance breeds ignorance. And that needs to stop. And a lot of people, I notice their opinions of me, which is fine. Everybody has an opinion.
Right.
But they need to realize an opinion doesn't make it the truth. It's just an opinion. And I want to set some things straight on my life, how I know it, because I actually lived it, and that's what the book's all about. It's an actual autobiography. Like I said, it's not about the crime. It's not to glorify the crime or anything like that. The crime is a part of my life. You know, I can't tell somebody I did almost 24 years in prison and not tell them why.
Right, exactly.
You know, so it is a part of my life. The whole 24 years in prison, that's a whole nother story right there. There are things that happened in my life. Believe me, none of those people on the internet that are slandering me know anything about.
Right.
You know? So I was an open book and said, here it is. You want to know about me? You really want to know? Here it is. Got any questions afterwards? Fine, I'll answer them. But I tried to do the best I could to just lay it out there.
And it's really kind of your way of clearing the air and really just putting yourself out there for people to know. You know.
I put myself out there. I don't blame. I don't point a finger. You know, I know when you point, there's 3 pointing back at yourself. I don't do that. I take my responsibility. I was involved in horrible things in my life, especially the death of another human being. I was a participant. Absolutely. I take that. I never deny that. You know, but the things that are happening now, you know, you can't make up things that are happening that happened 30 years ago, you know, and say, oh no, we know this, we know that. No, you don't. I mean, you're making things up now. And I just said, once and for all, I need to just be raw, uncut. Here it is.
Now, with these types of topics, they're always a sensitive topic, and there's usually some kind of following. For those people that are interested in your book, how do they go about, you know, finding it?
They could go on Amazon. They can actually get both. Hope Beyond the Fences by Kay Crane. That was my pen name.
Your first book?
That was my first book.
Okay.
The second one is now just on like Kindle and ebook, that kind of thing. Right now, we don't have hard copies out right now. We're just doing the ebook, and that's Amazon as well. And you could probably find it on a couple other places, but I just know Amazon has both for sure.
So Amazon.
And it's easier, yeah.
Okay. And what advice would you give to, maybe there could be teenagers watching right now? What would you say to them if they don't know the first step to take? Like if they're feeling like they're being bullied and they don't even know how to address it, what's maybe a first piece of advice you'd give them?
Tell somebody. If you have great parents, because I know some parents, there are issues in the home life. I do understand that. But if you can talk to your parents, tell them. If you could talk to a teacher or somebody in your school that you respect and trust, tell them. If you have older siblings, you know, tell them. If you have cousins that are older, tell them. If you know any policeman, you could stop a cop and say, hey, can I talk to you for a minute? I'm being bullied, help me. That's a big thing in the police force. They'll help. But they just have to know that it's okay to tell. To say, I'm being bullied, I don't know what to do. Because what's happening out there, that's not the answer. Like the cyberspace, kids are committing suicide because they read something about themselves. Well, I read stuff, I'm being bullied right now by the victim's family and a whole bunch of others. I'm being bullied on the internet, but I have a choice. I don't have to read it. And because I don't have to read it, that gives me strength to go about my life. Same with the kids. Don't read it. You know, it's a bunch of, you know, it's just not necessarily true. So don't read it.
So like self-control.
Right. Take the power, the wind out of their sails. Just don't read it. Don't let it affect you. I know it's easier to say than to do, but turn off the internet. Don't even use it. Don't even look. Tell somebody. Don't read it. Talk about it. Write notes if you have to. Name names if you have to. I know the big thing is, well, now you're a snitch, or now you're this, and they throw that. Of course they're going to say that because they don't want to be fronted off. If somebody would have told on me when I was in school, because I was the kid that would push people into lockers, and drop their books and have after-school fights, I was part of that. If somebody just one of those kids would have told on me to the teacher, I would have been so humiliated. I would have got angry, I'm sure, but I would have been afraid as well.
Right.
And if somebody would have just told on me, a lot of what I did would have stopped.
Mm-hmm.
It would have stopped.
So speaking up and speaking out.
Absolutely.
And what just piece of advice would you give to maybe someone that's watching that is a bully? What would you say to them?
That you're being a bully because you can't cope with what's going on in your own life.
Mm-hmm.
And what bullies do is they take their own pain out on somebody who they deem as weaker.
Mm-hmm.
Bullies don't go pick on somebody they think that could beat them up. They pick on the weaker people that they think is weaker. And they do that because they don't want to admit that they're hurting.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to admit that they're scared. They don't want to admit that they've maybe been molested or their parents are alcoholics and they're being, physically abused. Whatever the situation may be, they've been, whatever it may be, they don't want to admit it and they don't know how to cope with it because coping skills they lack.
Right.
So they hurt other people. And then they join the pack animals, like I said, they'll find the other bullies who will praise them and build them up. And they'll think, wow, look at me, I'm tough, I'm strong. No, you're not. You're the weakest thing out there.
Mm-hmm.
You're trying to pick on the weakest people, but you're the weakest link. Because if one of those weak people turn around and said, yeah, you know what, you're not going to do this to me no more. I'm going to go tell. Or do what you're going to do, but people are going to know what you're doing. Mm-hmm. That diffuses a bully. Mm-hmm. It diffuses a bully. When they're afraid of cops, go tell a cop. Last thing I would have wanted is a cop to go by when I'm in a fight.
Right. Right.
There needs to be more attention out there with the teachers, with the police force, with the parents,
Mm-hmm.
Neighborhoods. You see your neighbor kid going and doing something, tell the parent,
Mm-hmm.
or tell somebody, or tell the cops.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, these kids are a little off the hook.
Mm-hmm.
They may need to be looked into.
Right.
But to the bully, I just say, shine the light inside and find out. It's your mess that you're trying to take out on everybody else.
Do some soul searching.
That's right. That's right.
And maybe letting go of some of the insecurities.
Right. And for those being bullied by whoever the bully is, consider that. That person has something going on in their life that they are so scared and so tormented by that they have to be mean to me for no reason. There should be a pity level that comes up that says, wow, you are more insecure and scared than I am by you.
Right.
Pray for them. If you're a praying person, pray for them.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, speak out. Yeah, just speak out.
And so my last question is, there's always going to be maybe that following that's just angry to see you out, angry to see you moving forward with your life and trying to do good.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you hope to gain from your book being, open and working with LAPD and with your bullying movement? What do you hope to get from people?
Well, what I actually hope to gain is you gotta remember one thing. I know people are angry at me. Nobody could be more angry at me than me.
Right.
Nobody can. I don't care what they think, but nobody can. And what I hope to gain is I hope to bring some experience, knowledge, and education out to these people so that lives can be changed. I have no ulterior motive. I'm not trying to financially gain, like people have accused me of. I contribute whatever little income I do get even on my own personal little job that I have, which believe me is not much because it's hard to get a job as a felon, I donate a proceed to the Nick Lowry Foundation. You know, I contribute and donate to different organizations that fight against against bullying. And what I hope to gain is that some people would have some insight. It's not about Karen. It's really not about Karen. It's about all the victim's name. Well, I won't say her name, but it's about all the other victims out there that they need help. And if my life, that was part of taking a life, if I could help one other person, then my purpose is being fulfilled. If I can help 2 other people, then my purpose has doubled. If I can help a mass majority to turn away and to help people that are in trouble like I was and like the victim was, if we can get people knowledgeable to reach a hand out and help
before something bad
happens, right? Then I've gained. Then I've gained, and that's all I want.
Okay. So moving forward, you're going to be working on your anti-bullying movement.
Right.
Are you going to have any other books coming out or anything?
Well, just the one that I'm tentatively working on with Nick Lowry, but that I think is for more like young school kids. I don't know yet about my book, if I want to continue to write. I probably do. I probably will. Not sure what it will be. I was asked to put together like a book on bullying, to be able to pass like a little small booklet to be able to pass out to schools.
Okay.
So that's something I'm really considering doing, because it's easier to have a hands-on, to be able to pass out. So I'm considering doing that.
That would be good.
Right.
Well, thank you so much, Karen, for just kind of sitting down and being so open with us. I really appreciate it. We wish you the best of luck. I think moving forward for you, that's the best thing you can do, and really making a difference at a time where teens are so easily influenced. I hope that will really make an impact, hearing your experience and with them going through what they may be going through right now as teens. Hopefully that can, really contribute an important part of their life. So thank you so much for the interview. Stay tuned, you guys. You're watching Real Talk 101 Radio, Shannon Fox, MJS Productions.